Right, our fifth and final speaker, I'm not going to say and embarrass him with what he joked about me before this event. I told him I wouldn't. He is fantastic. He is the head of Environmental, Social and Governance Advisory at Westpac and is going to speak about sustainable finance. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Olaf Adam. Going to reintroduce him because my script was wrong. I was like, I thought I saw his last name on his name thing. Olaf Adam, please welcome to the stage.
Kia ora. Yeah, confusingly, my last name is a first name, so first one is easy, just like the snowman in Frozen, so that's me. Thank you very much for having me. My role in Westpac, so there's two things I need to admit up front. The first one is I'm not the head of sustainable finance, I'm the head of ESG. The second thing is I have very little experience in the primary and the horticulture sector, so how I ended up doing this, I don't know, but hopefully I can share a few insights. So what I will do in my presentation is to talk a little bit about the context in which sustainable finance sits for us as a bank, why it is still really, really important for us, and then give a brief introduction in the kind of structures that we are currently doing, one in particular that is very popular in the primary sector and also with some of our horticulture customers, so that would be of interest. And then I will just shamelessly advertise our team and our services and hopefully have some time for questions later on the panel. So hopefully that works for everyone. There we go. So for context, why is there still such a continued focus on sustainability, particularly for us banks? There's been a lot of controversy, there's been a lot of media coverage, a lot of noise around the roles of banks in this space. I'm going to make a very simple business case for it for us, and that starts with risk management. Banks are really good at managing risks, that's what we do. That's our job, lend money, try to get it back. Charge on the way through, that's our business model, so risk management is at the heart of it all. And what I've put up here is a slide from the World Economic Forum. Every year for the last 25 years they do a survey among international global investors around the kinds of risks that they see to themselves, and they make them rank them by severity. And when they started this exercise sort of 25 years ago, there were a lot of economic sort of conventional risks that people brought up, you know, balance sheet strength and, you know, company cash flows and all this sort of jazz. And over time, other risks became more and more important. And what we are facing in at the moment is a really interesting situation. We've got, in the short term, we're seeing some classic ESG risk already rising very much to the top. Geopolitics, misinformation, disinformation, I don't know why they would rate that at the moment so high, but there we are. But extreme weather already being very much at the top of the list for a lot of institutional investors. But then when we look at the more longer term risk horizon over the 10-year period, then we're seeing that those environmental risks are very much rising to the very top of the list. Bear in mind here, this is out of a list of about 40 different risks. So this is already the top ones, right? So just because you're there on number 10 doesn't mean you're not important. You are important as a risk class. So that's really, really quite critical. And to us, that really, what that means is, if investors care about that stuff, then surely they're going to care about how different organizations and companies are managing them. And that makes it really, really important for us as a bank to get underneath those risks, understand them, what they mean for us. And for us as a bank, that means understand what they mean for our customers, especially those that borrow money. So really, really important. Now, other key perspective here to bear in mind when we're thinking about sustainability, and we often talk about it in the context of a stakeholder-centric perspective on your business. So who is out there that cares about what you're doing? What do they care about? How sensitive are they towards it? And what decisions could they make on the back of that? There's a key group here that will look at, you know, if you think about investors, and we've heard a couple of those just now, but there's a couple of things to really think about here. The first one is you've got institutional, if you think about institutional investors and what they care about. So one of the fun facts is that most of the assets that are internationally, globally actively managed are actually retirement funds, super funds. And as people have worked out sort of in the last decade is when you are managing someone else's money, you're not just there to maximize profit year on year. You're actually there to understand their objectives, their priorities, and act accordingly. And if you're dealing with someone who's investing the money with you for 20 years, you've got to worry about that stuff on the right-hand side. It's not just what's happening next year. You've got to worry about that stuff. So asset managers have become very, very attuned to the long-term strength and the long-term perspectives and the long-term horizons of the assets that they manage. So that's why these sustainability factors have sort of risen to the top just in the last 10 or so years. It wasn't just that we suddenly discovered that climate change is bad. It actually was a realization of the new definition of fiduciary duties of asset managers that have given rise to the ESG risks. And that has not changed, right? People have become a little bit quieter around it again. First point there on the left, misinformation, disinformation, clearly to see why that is, but on the substance, that still happens. The second one that is quite interesting when you think about the long-term perspective of investors. Many people, or many companies, particularly in the primary sector, are family-owned businesses. And when I speak to family businesses and business owners, I often hear them talk about what really drives them. And it's about intergenerational thinking. It's about handing something to the next generation that is better than it was. And the same goes, of course, for mana whenua. Right? So it's absolutely understandable why these things on the right matter a lot more than just the things on the left. So the investor perspective is really important. Market access, I'm not going to repeat what's being talked about. You know there's way more than me. But that's a key driver here for continuing to focus on sustainability. Another key part is, of course, regulatory focus. And I just want to touch on two things there. The first one is on the regulatory side. Many of you will be aware, would have heard about climate-related disclosures. I know very few in the room will be directly impacted by that, but one of the key features of climate-related disclosures for those that have to do them. Now, the obligation is not that they must reduce their emissions or that they must force their suppliers to do certain things. The obligation is you must report about them. You must disclose what you're doing. Now, that's the explicit obligation. The implicit obligation is if I have to talk about something publicly and loudly, I better make sure it's good. And therefore, when people are talking about their value chain emissions, they better have a good story that comes with it. So that means that the pressure that arises on institutions or organizations that have to do climate-related disclosures filters through their supply chain, through their value chain, and some of you will pick that up along the way, and some of you already will be feeling that pressure. But again, regulation, the rise of climate-related disclosures, not just in New Zealand, but in other countries as well, and most countries we're exporting to have them now. If they don't have them, then the big players do them voluntarily. That pressure will maintain and will continue, and if anything, it's going to get stronger and will get pressure and will get further down the supply chain. The second part on the regulatory side, and I know you talked about red tape earlier, and some may be thinking about green tape, but whenever you do stuff on the land, there is impacts beyond the boundaries of your own organization. These impacts affect others. They could be good, they can be bad. That drives regulation, that drives social expectations, and therefore it's always important to keep a really, really close eye on that. Doing things that reduce the impacts is therefore never a bad idea. Finally, customers and employees. So we talked, I've heard quite a few of you already raised the, how did you call it? We're all trying to find that one unicorn. Chances are that unicorn is really interested in what you do with the land, what your impact is, what good you do for people and planet. So it's really important to not just think about your customers and your shareholders, but also think about the people that work for you, because it's not just about getting the right people, getting that unicorn. You want that unicorn to work hard, and you want that unicorn to work hard happily. And so it's really important to keep that in mind. So that's why we think that sustainability is still essentially critical for the long-term success of any business. And as a bank, we've been around 175 years. You know, we are all about the long-term success. We do well if our customers do well. We do well if we understand what our customers need to be successful. Then we can meet their demands for the best solutions that we can offer. And that's one of the key drivers behind sustainable finance. And because I'm not an absolute expert at this, I'm just going to keep this really brief. There's two types, basically. You can finance a thing that is demonstrably green. We call them proceeds-based borrowing. So you're doing an environmental initiative, you're buying a green thing that could be, that could be solar panels on the side of your orchard, or that could be a piece of electric equipment that replaces some diesel equipment. Whatever that might be, that's a proceeds-based sort of funding solution, right? And you would have, and most banks have a product for that. Bring us UAV, we give you a cheaper rate, simplistically put. That's pretty straightforward. However, there's always a bit of admin involved. In this instance, you must prove that you used the proceeds to buy this thing. And so, red tape, sorry, but credibility is the currency in this space. So we need to ensure, as a provider of financial services, that if we're calling something green, it really is. So that's sort of the downside here for sustainable finance. You've got to prove that it is indeed sustainable and green. The other side, which is a bit more interesting personally, is sustainability linked. And sustainability linked is when we are basically financing an entire entity on its journey from A to B, from light green to dark green. And that comes down to really having a cohesive, well-structured, thought-through sustainability strategy with specific targets, and then the bank will tag its loan structuring to those targets, and we'll treat them in a similar way that we would treat covenants, but we're tying the pricing to them. So if you reach targets, your pricing gets cheaper. If you don't reach the targets, your pricing stays where it is. Now, that's a really, really nice way of putting more rigor and structure and more governance behind your sustainability strategy, holding yourself to account, but also publicly making a really, really strong commitment. Because often it's important to kind of raise these things out. So we are finding that companies that have these kinds of structures in place, it almost becomes a badge of honor. And when you're talking to some of your customers, having these sorts of structures that you can demonstrate demonstrates that you're literally putting your money where your mouth is. And so that's a really, really interesting structure. The downside with that, it's a bit more complicated. We're back to admin. You've got to get a strategy. You've got to have some targets. The targets need to be ambitious yet credible. And you've got to have some reporting and measurement and all that sort of stuff in place to make that work. So that's generally not something that you do for $1 million loan, but it's certainly something that we do extensively in the institutional space, so in the bespoke structuring, but we also, and here's the money slide, we have a product for the primary sector where we have taken the kind of sustainability linked kind of approach, looking at the entire organization, at the entire company, or the farm, or whatever structure it takes, and defining a set of criteria that we want that particular entity to meet, and then tying the discounts onto those. That's quite a novel thing. We stood alone on this for quite a while. One of our peers has now joined us on the party, but that was launched in 2023, and we have quite a few customers that, including the horticultural space, that take this up. 43% of Westpac's agricultural lending is now on that product. Why do we love it? Well, it's costing, obviously we're giving discounts for this. They're not massive, but they do exist, and on a significantly large portfolio, that's not trivial. However, one of the key drivers for us here is that we are future-proofing our customers, that we are incentivizing, no, we're not future-proofing them, they do this themselves, but we are putting our bit on the table and we are incentivizing them doing the right thing by themselves. And that makes our portfolio more resilient, that gives us more confidence that our customers are heading in the right directions, and resilience here is really, really the important word. We don't know what the future looks like, right? You've seen the slides there at the beginning. That's what we are, the place we are currently in is a disorderly transition, and we are already feeling the impacts of climate change in many, many forms. So we don't quite know how bad it's going to get and how messy it's going to get. But if our customers are doing these things and do them well, then intuitively, and probably by evidence now, we know that this portfolio, that these customers will perform better and will make us more successful as a bank. And that's why we still really, really strongly encourage that uptake of these products, and that's why we are still really, really strongly underpinning and underlining our commitments to ESG and to sustainability. It's in our own self-interest because it's in your self-interest. So, how are we looking for time? You can read them in your own time. It's also on our website. And if you have any technical questions, we have really, really people that know a lot more about this than me. There's an email address, Sustainable Finance, really easy to remember. And this is our Sustainable Finance team. They know how to structure these transactions. And if you have any technical questions, don't ask me, ask them. And we get lots of prizes for this stuff. Thank you.